The text message arrived at 3:47 a.m., its blue light cutting through the darkness of my study. I was still awake, reviewing investment portfolios, a habit that had helped build my fortune, though my family still thought I worked night security at an office building. Dad's gone. Heart attack. Don't bother coming to the funeral. Mom doesn't want you there. None of us do. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. My sister Katherine, always efficient, even in cruelty. I stared at my phone, memories flooding back of the last time I'd seen our father, 6 months ago, at the family's annual summer gathering. Still working that dead-end security job, Alex? He'd asked, not bothering to hide his disappointment as he stood in front of his newly renovated mansion. At your age, I was already running my own company. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned not just a company, but an entire investment firm. Sullivan Capital Partners, though they knew it under a different name, the one I used to hide my identity when I started buying up their mortgages. I set my phone down and turned to the wall of monitors in my study, each displaying different financial portfolios. With a few clicks, I pulled up the ones that mattered most tonight: the mortgage documents for every family member's home. Katherine's lakefront property, bought at the height of her surgeon husband's success. My brother Michael's sprawling ranch house, purchased with money from his thriving law practice. Mom and Dad's mansion, recently refinanced to fund Dad's latest business venture. Even my youngest sister Emma's townhouse, which she barely managed to qualify for with her interior design income. All of them, every property, owned by my holding companies through a complex web of financial instruments they'd never bothered to understand when signing their refinancing documents. They'd been so eager to get lower interest rates, to free up cash for their extravagant lifestyles, that they never questioned why some anonymous investment firm would be so generous. I picked up a framed photo from my desk, the last family picture where I'd been included, taken 15 years ago at my college graduation. Back then, they'd still had hope that I'd make something of myself, follow in Dad's footsteps, become another success story they could brag about at country club dinners. Instead, I chose a different path. While they chased appearances, I chased fundamentals. While they bought luxury cars on credit, I took night classes in finance and investment law. While they bragged about their addresses in exclusive neighborhoods, I quietly built an empire in the shadows. Another text lit up my phone. Katherine again. Service is Thursday at Street Michael's, 11 a.m. Mom's clear about this, Alex. You showing up would just remind everyone of Dad's biggest disappointment. Honor his memory by staying away. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my attorney. It was time to set things in motion. After years of hiding in the shadows, of playing the family failure while secretly holding the strings to their financial lives, the moment had finally come. Janet, I wrote, initiate protocol family trust. Begin with property clause 7.3. The response came within minutes, despite the early hour. Janet had been waiting for this day as long as I had. All documents prepared. Do you want to proceed with full disclosure or stage revelation? I thought about Katherine's texts, about Dad's final words to me at that summer gathering. At least your siblings made something of their lives. At least they gave me something to be proud of. Full disclosure, I typed back. Send everything to their lawyers first thing in the morning. And Janet, make sure the mortgage documents are on top. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun rise over the city through my penthouse windows. Most people would probably expect me to feel satisfaction in this moment, maybe even joy. But all I felt was a deep, hollow ache where family should have been. My phone buzzed again, Emma this time, the youngest, the only one who occasionally showed a hint of kindness. Alex, I know Kath told you to stay away, but maybe we could meet before Thursday. Coffee? There are things about Dad you should know. Too little, too late. I had already set the wheels in motion. By this time tomorrow, their perfectly curated lives would begin to unravel, not through any active malice on my part, but simply through the revelation of truth they'd been too proud to see. I opened my safe and pulled out a thick folder labeled Family Properties. Inside were the original copies of every document, every contract, every piece of paper that proved the family failure, the disappointment, the night security guard, actually owned every roof over their heads. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had spent his life teaching us that appearances were everything, that success was measured in square footage and car brands. He never realized that his most dismissed child had learned a different lesson. True power doesn't need to be seen to be real. I picked up my phone one last time, opening Katherine's message thread. With steady hands, I took a photo of the mortgage documents spread across my desk, my signature clearly visible on each one. The same signature they dismissed as belonging to some anonymous investment firm. Actually, Kath, I typed, I think I will be attending. After all, it's traditional for a man's largest creditor to pay his respects. Then I turned off my phone, walked to my bedroom, and finally allowed myself to grieve, not just for my father, but for the family we might have been if they'd bothered to see past appearances. Tomorrow would bring chaos. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shatter their carefully constructed world. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of my penthouse, I was just a son who had lost his father, a brother cut off from his siblings, and a man who had finally run out of reasons to keep his success a secret. The stage was set. The truth was ready to emerge. And by Thursday's funeral, they would all understand exactly who the real failure in the family was and wasn't. The law offices of Brandenburg and Associates opened at 9 a.m. sharp. By 9:05, their conference room was already filling with attorneys representing every member of my family. Janet had done her job well. The documents had arrived exactly on schedule. I watched through the security feeds I'd had installed months ago. Another investment nobody questioned. Katherine arrived first, her surgeon husband Thomas and Tao, both still carrying the artificial confidence of people who thought they controlled their own destiny. Michael showed up minutes later, his law degree apparently not preparing him for what he was about to read. Emma slipped in last, looking smaller than usual in her designer clothes that I knew she could barely afford. Mom didn't attend. She was probably still at the mansion, planning Dad's funeral, arranging the elaborate send-off he would have wanted. I wondered if she'd chosen his burial suit yet, the one he'd specially ordered from his London tailor, now hanging in a closet in a house I technically owned. Mr. Sullivan? My assistant David's voice came through the intercom. They opened the packets. I switched to a closer camera feed, watching their faces as reality sank in. Katherine was the first to react, her practiced surgeon's composure cracking as she flipped through page after page of mortgage documents. This has to be a mistake, she kept saying, her voice rising with each repetition. Check the signatures again. Michael, the lawyer, sat in stunned silence, probably recognizing the legal framework I'd constructed. He'd specialized in corporate law, but even he could appreciate the elegant complexity of what I'd built. Every transaction legitimate, every document ironclad, every signature willingly given, just not to the person they thought they were giving it to. Emma was crying quietly, clutching her phone. I knew she was trying to reach me, but my number was already disconnected. The new one would only be shared after everything was settled. My office phone buzzed again. "Sir," David said, "Catherine's husband is demanding to speak with the firm's principal. He's becoming aggressive." I smiled slightly. Thomas had always solved his problems by shouting at them. Put him through to Janet. A moment later, Thomas's voice filled my office, all bluster and threatened legal action. Janet handled him exactly as I'd trained her. "Dr. Harrison," she said calmly, "your property was legally acquired through standard market processes. The fact that you failed to verify the identity of your mortgage holder before signing the refinancing documents is, frankly, your own oversight. This is fraud," he bellowed. "Concealing ownership is perfectly legal when done through registered corporate entities." Janet cut in. "As your wife's brother, Mr. Michael Sullivan, can no doubt confirm. Now would you like to discuss payment arrangements for next month's mortgage, or shall we proceed with the default provisions?" The silence that followed was deafening. I switched camera feeds again, focusing on Michael. He had finally found his voice and was trying to explain to Katherine why they had no legal recourse. His face had taken on the gray pallor of someone watching their world collapse. My phone buzzed. Emma again, this time with a text. "Alex, please. We need to talk. I know we've been awful, but this will destroy Mom." Right after losing Dad, I almost replied. Emma had always been different from the others, less caught up in the family's obsession with status. But then I remembered last Christmas, when she joined the others in mocking my simple lifestyle and lack of ambition. She'd laughed along when Katherine suggested I serve drinks at her next dinner party, since I was used to circus work anyway. Instead of responding, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my property management company. They needed to be prepared for what was coming. Either a flood of late payments from my suddenly humbled family members or a series of eviction proceedings. The next few hours brought a cascade of increasingly desperate messages. From Katherine, "Whatever game you're playing, stop it now. You're disgracing Dad's memory." From Michael, "This won't hold up in court. I'll find a way to break these contracts." From Thomas, "You pathetic little man. You think this makes you powerful? Wait until everyone knows what you've done." I saved each message, adding them to my collection of family communications. 15 years of dismissals, insults, and exclusions, all carefully archived. Someday, perhaps, they would understand that this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. At 2 p.m., my mother finally called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as her voice cracked with emotion. "Alexander James Sullivan, how dare you do this? Today of all days? Your father would be so ashamed. We gave you everything, every opportunity, and this is how you repay us? By becoming some sort of a financial predator?" I saved that message too, right next to the one from last year where she told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving unless I did something about that embarrassing job. Janet's voice came through the intercom again. "They're leaving the law office, sir. Would you like me to proceed with Phase 2? Phase 2, the revelation about the business holdings, because the properties were just the beginning. Over the years, I'd acquired controlling interests in Thomas's medical practice building, the strip mall where Emma's design studio rented space, and the office complex where Michael's law firm was headquartered. Not yet, I decided. Let them absorb this first. Some lessons need to be learned slowly to be learned well. I turned back to my monitors, watching my siblings emerge from the law office. They looked shell-shocked. their expensive clothes and perfect hair no longer projecting the confidence they'd worn like armor just hours ago. Katherine was already on her phone, probably calling her banker friends, looking for a way out. She wouldn't find one. I'd made sure of that years ago, carefully building relationships with every major lender in the city. To them, I was Alexander Morgan, CEO of Morgan Investment Group. None of them knew Morgan Investment Group was just one arm of Sullivan Capital Partners. Michael walked to his car alone, his usual strutting walk replaced by something more hesitant. He'd finally met a legal problem he couldn't solve with charm and family connections. Emma stood on the sidewalk the longest, still clutching her phone, still hoping I'd respond. Of all of them, she was the only one I felt a twinge of regret about. But family loyalty, I'd learned, was an all-or-nothing proposition. I picked up my own phone, looking at the last photo I had of all of us together. Dad stood in the center, of course, his arm around Katherine, beaming with pride. Michael and Emma flanked them, all success and smiles. I was on the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, already becoming the ghost they'd eventually pretend I was. Tomorrow was the funeral. Tomorrow, they would have to face not just the loss of their father, but the loss of their illusions. Tomorrow, they would learn that the brother they dismissed had become the foundation their lives were unknowingly built upon. And tomorrow, they would finally understand that success isn't measured in appearances, but in the quiet power of carefully laid plans. I closed the security feeds and turned to the window, watching the sun set over the city. In less than 24 hours, I would face my family again, not as the failure they thought I was, but as the power behind their thrones, the owner of their homes, the holder of their debts. But tonight, I had one more task to complete. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. Dad's last birthday card to me, returned unopened with "Address unknown," scrawled across it in Katherine's handwriting. "Don't worry, Dad," I whispered to the quiet room. "I'll take care of them, just not in the way you expected." St. Michael's Cathedral stood proud against the morning sky, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like accusing fingers. I parked my car, not the modest sedan they were used to seeing, but the Bentley I usually reserved for business meetings, and straightened my bespoke suit. Time to stop playing the part of the family failure. The funeral was scheduled for 11 a.m. I arrived at 10:30, watching from my car as the family gathered on the cathedral steps. Mother, dressed in elegant black, accepting condolences with practiced grace. Katherine and Thomas, their usual confidence dimmed, but not extinguished. Michael, looking uncomfortable in a suit that suddenly seemed less expensive than usual. Emma, red-eyed and fidgeting with her phone, probably still hoping I'd respond to her messages. At 10:45, Janet arrived with a team of lawyers, each carrying briefcases filled with Phase 2 documents. They positioned themselves strategically around the cathedral, ready for what was coming. At 10:55, I stepped out of my car. The reaction was immediate. Katherine saw me first, her face going pale beneath her perfect makeup. She grabbed Thomas's arm, whispering urgently. Michael started forward, probably planning to physically stop me, but Janet's lawyers smoothly intercepted him. Emma just stood there, tears running down her face, ruining her mascara. Mother turned last, her practiced smile freezing in place. "You dare," she hissed as I approached. "You dare show up here after what you've done." I stopped at the foot of the cathedral steps, looking up at my family. "Hello, Mother, Katherine, Michael, Emma. I believe I have every right to be here. After all, I'm the one who paid for this funeral. What? Mother's voice cracked. I nodded to Janet, who opened her briefcase and began distributing documents. The funeral home, the cathedral rental, the reception venue, all paid for through one of my companies. Just like your homes, just like your offices, just like almost everything else in your lives for the past 5 years. Michael, ever the lawyer, snatched the papers from Janet's hand. This is impossible. These companies, Morgan Investment Group, Horizon Capital, Summit Partners, all subsidiaries of Sullivan Capital Partners. I finished for him. My company, the one I built while you were all too busy mocking my dead-end job to notice. Katherine found her voice, though it shook with rage. You manipulated us, spied on us, bought our debts like some kind of a vulture. No, I corrected her calmly. I offered fair market rates. Better than fair, actually. You all just didn't bother to read the fine print. Too busy maintaining appearances to worry about details. Right, Kath. Just like you were too busy to visit Dad in the hospital last month when he actually needed you. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. How did you? Thomas began. How did I know? I was there. Every night, sitting with him while he slept. The security guard uniform made it easy to blend in. No one notices the help, do they? I turned to Mother. He asked for you, you know. All of you. But you were all too busy with your perfect lives to spend time with a dying man. Emma stepped forward, her voice small. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell us he was so sick? Would it have mattered? When was the last time any of you returned his calls? Did you know he stopped trying to reach you 3 months ago? That he spent his last Christmas alone because you all had more important engagements? Mother's composure finally cracked. You have no right to judge us. You, who spent years pretending to be something you're not. You mean like you've been pretending to be wealthy while drowning in debt? Like Michael's been pretending his law practice isn't failing? Like Catherine's been pretending her marriage isn't falling apart under the weight of all their lies about money? I climbed the steps slowly, each word measured. I pretended to be less than I am. You all pretended to be more. Which is worse. The cathedral bells began to toll, marking the hour. Guests were arriving, watching our family drama unfold with poorly concealed interest. What do you want? Michael asked, his voice hollow. Money? Control? Revenge? I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. Dad's returned birthday card. I want you to understand what he tried to teach us, what you were all too proud to learn. I handed the envelope to Mother. Success isn't about appearances. It's about substance. It's about building something real. And this, Katherine gestured at the lawyers, the documents, the revealed lies. This is your idea of something real? No, I said quietly. This is your wake-up call. The properties, the businesses, the debts. They're all being transferred into a family trust. One that will ensure none of you can ever sell or leverage them to maintain your illusions again. You can't do this, Thomas protested. I already have. You'll all keep your homes, your offices, your lifestyles, but only if you earn them. Real jobs, real work, real value. I turned to enter the cathedral. Starting today, we all live in truth. And if we refuse, Mother's voice was ice. I paused at the door. Then you lose everything, your choice. But before you decide, you might want to read what Dad wrote in that card you sent back unopened. Inside the cathedral, I took my place in the front pew, not the back corner where they would have relegated me, but front and center, where a son should be to mourn his father. One by one, they followed. Emma first, then Michael, then Katherine and Thomas, and finally Mother. As the service began, I opened my copy of Dad's last card, the one he'd given me personally during those night visits at the hospital. His shaky handwriting filled the page. "Alex, my quiet son, I finally understand what you've built, what you've become. I'm sorry it took me so long to see past appearances. Take care of them when I'm gone. They'll need your strength more than they know. Love, Dad." The organ began to play, its deep notes reverberating through the cathedral. I felt Mother's hand slip into mine, tentative, questioning. On my other side, Emma wiped away fresh tears. And there, in the house of God, surrounded by the trappings of the funeral I'd paid for, I realized that sometimes the greatest power isn't in destroying illusions, but in being strong enough to help rebuild what remains after they shatter. The lawyers quietly packed away their briefcases. The documents would wait. Today wasn't about properties or trusts or revelations. Today was about saying goodbye to a father who, in his final days, had finally seen the truth about his children, all of them. As the priest began to speak about legacy and love, I squeezed Mother's hand gently. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture, I felt the first trembling possibility of a new kind of family. One built not on appearances or pride, but on the foundations I'd spent years quietly laying. Truth, substance, and the kind of success that doesn't need to be displayed to be real. After all, that's what Dad would have wanted. Not the man who chased status and appearances all his life, but the one who'd finally learned better in his last days. The one who'd left me in charge of our family's future, knowing I'd find a way to make them see what he'd seen too late. That the greatest legacy isn't what you own, but what you build. And I had built something that would last. Not just an empire of properties and businesses, but a chance for our family to become something real. Something worth more than all the mortgages and mansions in the world. Something true.